Rated M for mature.
A serial killer inspired by the distant past, a missing journalist, clues left on the internet in a bizarre hunt. In Memoriam has all the ingredients of a gripping thriller. But there's a great deal more to it than just that. The game invents a new form of interactive fiction, which stands at the crossroads where cinema, the internet, and video games meet. In Memoriam, the player becomes an investigator, and within minutes, he's embroiled in a cliffhanging plot which he alone can unravel. In Memoriam is one of the very first investigation games to be firmly anchored in reality. Most of the game is on the CD-ROM, but now and then you have to turn detective and hunt down clues on the internet, rather like a modern detective would do today. As you progress through the story, you receive emails which set you off on various trails. This is the story of Jack Lorski, a journalist who went missing with his friend Karen while investigating a series of unusual murders. A few weeks after his disappearance, his agency receives a CD-ROM designed like a game. The CD-ROM is the only clue they possess. With the agreement of the police, the agency decides to publish it so as to increase their chances of finding Jack and Karen again. The killer teases the player, sending him clues in a regular but piecemeal fashion so as to set him off on various trails. In Memoriam was written and produced by Eric Viano, creator of The Adventures of Uncle Ernest, an award-winning series of video games for kids translated into more than 15 languages. In fact, the idea for In Memoriam grew out of personal experience. One day I received a screenplay. The first thing I did was type the screenwriter's name on the internet. I felt a bit like a hacker, visiting fairly confidential sites. One thing led to another, and I ended up surfing for 2 hours, as if I was carrying out a real-life police investigation. That's how I got the idea that this imaginative side to the internet could provide an interesting dimension to a game. First of all, a lot of research work was involved. All of the information given to the players had to be credible. We were letting them go onto the internet, so we had to make sure they wouldn't turn up contradictory information. I teamed up with Julie Lejeune, a young researcher, and she worked wonders. Sometimes she went to the French National Library and dreamed up excuses to gain access to some very old books of magic. She even had to wear gloves to consult them. And as a result of all that work, I concocted a character inspired by Julie. At a given moment in the game, the player receives emails sent by a certain Julie, who, in fact, is a history student. The internet constitutes one of the game's frameworks. A large number of sites had to be specially created by the team at Lexis Numeric, the production studio that developed the game. Players can go onto the net to find information on pre-existing sites, sites we created ourselves, and sometimes sites we worked on in partnership. For example, in France, you can turn up credible information on the site of the newspaper Liberation. To create all those sites, the web designers adopted a lot of different styles. It's rather amusing because, obviously enough, we had professional web designers on the team, and we were asking them to create amateur sites, something they were not particularly accustomed to doing. Though the player does have to search for information on the internet, most of the game takes place on the CD-ROM. Well, first of all, we had to imagine ourselves in the killer's shoes. With Etienne Mineur, we spent several weeks looking for a style. In other words, the Phoenix's distinctive signature. For example, we drew inspiration from the work of Vaughan Oliver and Joel Peter Vinkin. The Phoenix's style is a blend of photographs, materials, photos of places and bodies, and also drawings. For some screens, I asked an illustrator to provide drawings based on old engravings. For others, we completely recreated the illustrations we found in magical texts. A certain number of elements were created in 3D. Strange insects, for example, which often give the game a strikingly realistic appearance. The main part of the game is based on puzzles, which the player solves, mostly using the internet. But I didn't want the game to be entirely cerebral. So the killer also throws down challenges that require dexterity and skill. I think that by alternating between puzzles and mini-games, you get a sense of rhythm. And some gamers are quite surprised by the variety of screens you get on the CD-ROM. We also had to set up photo sessions at short notice to create the dark atmosphere we were looking for. And since the scenario relied on precise references, the slightest detail in the staging of the murders was important. There was one memorable occasion, for example, when everyone repeatedly got the giggles. I remember we were filming in the cellars of a suburban house. It so happened that the house was up for sale and some people came to visit it. One of the extras, who was dressed as a priest with a slit throat, went to answer the door. Imagine the faces of those guys who came to visit the house when they saw that priest open the door. Another important ingredient of In Memoriam is the films the player finds on the CD-ROM, which recount, month by month, the missing journalist's investigation. The film sequences aren't simply illustrative. Lasting 45 minutes in all, they make up a genuine medium-length film with all the distinctive characteristics of the medium. The film sequences serve several purposes within the game. They tell the story, enabling the player to link up the different pieces of the puzzle. Also, they provide clues, because you can zoom in on certain sequences. Since my scenario refers to real events, and I try to combine reality and fiction, it seemed to me only natural to call on the talents of real actors rather than use synthetic characters. The shooting was spread over nearly 2 years in 6 different European countries.
We've got fabulous memories of those shoots, which took us to the 4 corners of Europe. Prague is one of the best memories, because that's how we started out. It was the first real shoot we did. The day we arrived, the weather was beautiful, but we were a bit put out because there was no snow, and we needed snow for the film. We went to the hotel, and the next morning, when we woke up, there were 20 centimeters of snow. It had snowed all night. We felt as if we'd been blessed. There were a lot more moments like that. We were even stopped by the police, and we needed that to happen in the film. So we made the most of every experience.
After Prague, we went to Venice. Of course, Venice is a magical city. We filmed at night when the fog was moving in along the canals, in the shady atmosphere of those dark and dangerous back alleys. It was really impressive. In Istanbul, we were always on our feet, always walking, big blisters.
So all that, the contrast of climates over what in the end was very little time, and discovering sublime landscapes, all that of course had a big effect on us.
The work with the director was pretty unusual compared to the work an actor usually does.
We had very little text, or relatively little had been written down, so we had to elaborate on it ourselves or improvise. What we had to produce was mainly a visual effect. Emotions or feelings had to be generated by very specific situations shot on the spot. Though they were indicated by the script, they had to be interpreted in relation to the surroundings.
We were given creative freedom as actors to improvise. It was a really good experience.
Très appréciable.
One of the difficulties we came up against when filming was the fact that, to be totally convincing, the films had to be shot in the real places indicated in the scenario. Like when we went to Prague to shoot a scene in front of the house of an alchemist who had really existed. We used the front of the actual house where he used to live. One of the main difficulties involved in making In Memoriam was that the cameraman always had to remember that he was shooting under reporting conditions. When he uses the camera, it's one of the characters in the film, and he films the other characters or landscapes, but he can't do everything you can do in a fiction film where the camera can be fixed in any direction. And when holding the camera, he mustn't be too perfect, which sometimes happens. All of that was quite difficult, and I sometimes got told off for getting it wrong. We were often happy to let the actors film sequences themselves. This resulted in some astonishing scenes, which we couldn't have accomplished if we'd been filming in a traditional way. All these ingredients, together with a tight-knit screenplay, make In Memoriam an extraordinary game which, with its cinematic dimension, can reach out beyond the run-of-the-mill video game public. My main aim with In Memoriam was for the players to feel that they were taking part in a movie. For around 20 hours, they'll live out a powerful and unforgettable experience. And I strongly believe in the idea that video games, a century after the birth of cinema, represent a new narrative form capable of stirring up new emotions.